Hello there, I cannot wait to read you the final chapter of Cogheart. It is chapter 26. We have been waiting all this time to find out what happens to Lily and Robert, and most of all, what happens to that Cogheart that John has been keeping a secret all of this time. A few days later, Robert and Malkin jumped down from the number 38 omnibus and made their way along the busy, bustling streets of Westminster. Robert's hand was bandaged. The wound was healing well, but still felt a little itchy. Today was market day, and bright shop awnings stretched across the wintry blue skies, shading the pavements from the November sun. Along the centre of the cobbled street, stalls and trestle tables nestled in crooked rows, each piled high with incongruous merchandise, gas lamps next to airship anchors, next to wreaths of holly and ivy, bouquets of walking sticks beside rows of watch chains hung with pocket watches ticking in unison. Down side alleys, gangs of cog and bone men dealt broken mechanical parts from the back of steam wagons. His tail down, Malkin wove along under the carts, dodging the feet of various stallholders, looking for rotten apples and root vegetables to sniff at and prod with his nose. At the end of the row, Robert saw a fruit stall and stopped to buy a present for Lily and her papa. He had some coins Anna had given him, for he'd been staying with her, along with Mrs. Rust and the rest of their mechanical friends, while they waited for John and Lily to be discharged from the hospital. Robert selected a few apples from the stacks of fruit, crisp and red, and just about perfectly ripe. The mechanical stallholder put them in a brown paper bag for him, twirling the top shut with his big clamp-shaped fingers. As he waited for his change, Robert heard the newspaper boy on the other side of the road shout out the headlines. "Repairs continue on Big Ben. Mystery body found mangled in the mechanism." Robert felt a little ill. It was a good thing they'd got out of the tower when they did, before the police and firemen had made it up there. On the ground after the crash, New Palace Yard had been in chaos, and before anything could be asked of the four of them, they'd been ushered into an ambulance and taken to St. Thomas's across the river. On their journey to the hospital, Robert, John and Lily had agreed not to mention their role in the airship crash, especially not to anyone official. It would cause too much trouble, and there would be too many questions to answer about Lily, Professor Silverfish and the Cogheart. After all, no one on the ground had been hurt. Even Big Ben wasn't seriously damaged, if you didn't count the hole in the roof, or the repairs that would be needed to fix the mechanisms. And Robert tried not to count these things. It was, as his da used to say, broken clocks can always be fixed, but broken hearts are a far harder thing to save. Malkin's yapping brought him out of his reverie. "Come on," the fox barked, "or we'll be late to meet them." "Just a minute," Robert said, and he bought a paper from the boy. As they walked towards the hospital, he glanced quickly over the front page story. "Our reporter, Anna Quinn, can reveal that the rogue airship Behemoth's owner has been discovered. She traced the papers to a Professor Silverfish, a London resident, prominent inventor, and member of the Mechanics' Guild. It is now thought that he recently re-registered the ship in the names of two missing ex-army policemen, Messrs. Roach and Mould. The London Met have yet to disclose which of these three was found dead in the clock tower on the fateful day of the crash, or how the fellow fell into Big Ben's clockwork mechanism, but his body was quite mangled and unrecognisable. A further two bodies were recovered from the Thames nearby. In the last few days, Professor Silverfish's servants and close associates have been arrested and taken in for questioning to find out more about this terrible attack on Big Ben and Parliament." Robert stopped reading there and scanned the rest of the article because he didn't want to relive the details of that day. He'd told Anna as much when he recounted the truth to her, the whole truth, and then he vowed her to secrecy. She kept her word. There was no mention anywhere of John's or Lily's or his own involvement in the air crash or the true cause of it, nor did Anna reveal how the professor had fallen to his death, trying to kill them. Robert knew she'd done all this on a single condition. She'd made him promise that one day, when he and Lily were older and had put everything behind them, they'd let her tell their sensational tale in a book. and Robert had agreed, for he could think of no better person to write it, and no more fitting monument to his dar. He folded the paper under his arm and followed Malkin as the fox trotted up the steps and into St. Thomas's Hospital. On Ward 9, they found Lily and John dressed and packing to leave. John was putting things away in a suitcase, while Lily busily transferred her mamma's trinkets from her bedside into her pockets. Malkin had gone back to rescue them for her from the professor's house during the days of her recovery. "Robert! Malkin!" Lily cried in delight as soon as she saw them. "So good to see you!" "And you too," Malkin said. "How are you doing?" Robert asked. "All the better for seeing you both," Lily said, and John nodded in agreement. Robert glanced into the rosewood box and saw Lily had added the cap he'd given her and a button from his dar's coat to her selection of mementos. He stepped to the window and gazed briefly out over the river at the clock tower. Teams of men, like tiny ants, were scaling the side of the tower on hanging ropes to repair the clock face. Robert reckoned the same was probably going on inside too, at the clock's heart, only that was invisible to anyone looking from the outside. He turned back into the room to see Lily closing the lid of her case. She stood it on the floor and stepped over to give him a great big hug. "I'm so glad you're here to collect us. Robert, and you too, Malkin." She ruffled the fox's fur. "I think now I'm finally ready to go home." Robert's face fell. He wished he could say the same. There were times in the last few days, since the adrenaline of the adventure had worn off, when he dearly wanted to go home to his shop and see his dar again. But he knew it was not to be. There was nothing for him to go back to. "What about me?" he asked. "Where am I to go? I have no home. I suppose I could go to my ma, if I knew where she was, but I've not heard from her in years." John put a hand on his back. "I thought we'd discuss this, Robert. You're to come to live with us at Brackenbridge." Robert shook his head. "Thank you, sir," he said, "but I don't want you to help me just because you feel you have to." Lily pressed his fingers softly between her palms. "It's not that, Robert. It's not that at all." Then John spoke up again. "Robert, since we've been convalescing, Lily has reminded me what an excellent man your dar was. How brave and how clever. He saved her life and Malkin's, and yours too. We owe him a debt of gratitude. We owe you a debt too, Robert, for your courage. You are your father's son, and he would have been proud of what you did to help us." John sat down on the edge of the bed so his face was level with Robert's and looked him in the eye. "You may not realise this, but your father and I were once friends. 7 years ago, when we first moved to Brackenbridge, he often came to the house to wind our clocks, and later he'd order a part for me through his shop to help repair my mechanicals. On his visits, we'd sit together in my workshop and talk about projects or the clockwork things he was working on. He often told me about you, how you were getting on, learning the trade, how marvellous you were, and how proud he was to call you his son. I said to him then, if you showed promise in your craft, I'd help you learn as much as you could, teach you how to make mechanicals and mechanimals, as I did, and your dar agreed it would be something he'd like for you. So if you decide to come and live with us, I'd be pleased to teach you everything I know. What's more, I'd be proud to call you my son." "And I'd be proud to call you my brother," Lily said. "And I a friend," said Malkin, "though you're still a pup," he added grudgingly. Robert didn't know what to say. A tear came to his eye and he brushed it away with the sleeve of his coat. "Thank you. But there's Anna to think of. I've been staying with her since I was discharged, working on Ladybird. She's been looking after me." "Anna can come to stay with us too if she wants," John said. "She can moor up in the garden for as long as she likes, and if she has to go off on an adventure, you can go with her, if that's where you feel your heart lies. Adventures are fun so long as you have a home to go to, and a loving family around you when they're all over. I want you to know, Robert, you'll always have that at Brackenbridge with us." Robert smiled. "Then let's go home." They set off that very afternoon. Robert arranged for Anna to fly everyone back in Ladybird. He and Anna had been busy patching her up, installing a new quiet clockwork propulsion engine so that it would take them much less time to fly north, even including stopping overnight to allow Lily and John to rest. They were accompanied by Mrs. Rust, Captain Springer, Miss Tock, and Mr. Wingnut, and although Malkin said it was still a terrible way to travel, and Lily pronounced it a bit of a squeeze, Robert thought it was a fun journey. With his friends around him, he found he forgot his cares for a time. Anna and Papa got on well, and Anna told them all how pleased she was not to have to shovel coal anymore, though she missed the range for cooking. "But I'm glad," she added, "that I finally got to indulge in some spectacular sky piracy, and in the skies of London no less. Who'd have believed it?" As darkness fell, they stopped and made camp in a field under the stars. The humans wrapped themselves in thick woolen coats, and the mechanicals pottered around collecting logs and seeing to the fire. Lily drank in the cold air, so fresh and free from the smog of London. She and Robert were helping Anna pick up kindling, but she felt a little bit lost. When she glanced up, Robert was watching her. "What's the matter?" he asked. She shook her head. "I'm not sure I can explain. It's as if something's still missing." He waited. I wish I could be sure. Papa made his choices because he loved me, not because of a promise he made to Mamma, or," a worse thought struck her, "because he wanted to save his invention." She shook her head to dislodge the idea. "The funny thing is, the Cogheart could have helped so many people, done so much good in the world, and yet he chose to keep it secret. I don't think I'll ever understand that. I mean, could it really be so dangerous?" Robert shrugged. "Perhaps we'll never know," he said. "Or perhaps you'll be the one to find out. I keep thinking about the choices he made," she told him, "how Mamma died because of them. And I don't know if I deserve to even be here. Whether I can ever be good enough to ensure her death was not in vain." "You know, once," Robert said, "I was working in the shop doing some repairs on a music box, and it was all going wrong. Dad took me aside and told me to think of it like life. It looks complicated when you see all of the separate pieces, but the purpose of the music box is to play joyful music. You just have to remember how to fit them together so it will. The same with life, really. It's just about the living of it. That's all you have, and all you can do. Live and be happy." Lily smiled. "That may take a little work." "I know. Underneath, I feel the same way." They glanced over at Papa, who was sitting on the other side of the frosted field. This man who she thought she knew, who'd saved her, but then had passed her off to various governesses and guardians before sending her away to boarding school. She was sure he loved her, but maybe, just maybe, sometimes she wondered if he regretted his choice of saving her over Mamma. "Even after all that's happened," she told Robert, "in my heart of hearts I'm not sure who he is, what he believes in. He's still something of a stranger to me." "So you should tell him that," Robert said, "while you still can." Lily nodded. Later, when they were all sitting around the fire, while Anna and Mrs. Rust were busy cooking and the rest of the mechanicals played cards on an old log, Robert and Malcolm got up and went for a wander across the field, and Lily took the chance to speak to Papa alone. "Why did you do it? Why did you save me over Mamma?" He rubbed the back of his neck and looked at her thoughtfully. "I made the choice because we both loved you, Lil, and she would have done the same." Lily had her hands in her lap, but her fingers twisted against each other. "How can you be sure?" "Oh, Lily, before any of this, when you were very young and Mamma and I were both around, we made a pact that if anything happened, we'd save you first. It's a little morbid, I know, but we had to think of those things. My work, our work, was so dangerous, and there was always the chance something bad could occur." "Mamma worked with you as well?" Lily asked, shocked. It was another thing he'd kept from her. "Why did you never tell me?" "I'm sorry, Lily. Sorry I hid the past for so long, but it was so painful, and I was silly enough to think that if I ignored everything that had happened, eventually the pain would disappear. She was a great mechanist, your brother. A great inventor. But because of what we did, we had to be careful. Whenever we had to go away, and we left you with Mrs. Rust, we would always travel separately just in case. Your Mamma always made sure to put you first, Lily. All she thought about was you, So in that horrible moment when you were both at death's door and I had to make a choice, I knew who to save, because it's what she would have chosen too. I couldn't have lived with myself if I had gone against her wishes. I loved her more than anything in this world, and I feel the same way about you. He brushed a tear from his eye. Lily smiled and kissed his cheek. Thank you. They watched Robert throwing a stick. He was trying to shoo Malkin into catching it for him, but each time the mechanimal shook his head and refused. Between the two of them, Papa said, I don't know who's more stubborn. Me neither, Lily agreed. Early next morning, they flew over Brackenbridge Manor, and Anna brought Ladybird down on the frosted surface of the south lawn in the gardens furthest from the house. The family of friends descended from the airship. As they made their way up the steps, Lily ran ahead. She wanted to get there first, so she could greet everyone as they arrived. She opened the front door with Papa's key, but when she stepped into the porch, she was distressed to find it filled with empty tea crates, all stamped with the dress labels marked Rent and Sunder. The best furniture was clustered in the hallway, and a team of mechanical movers swarmed about, wrapping everything up in blankets and dust sheets. Madame Verdigris stood by the stairs directing their operations, while Mr. Sunder dashed about filling boxes with parcelled up things. Is this one for auction? He asked as he pushed a tea crate along the hall, scratching the surface of the floor. I think that one is for the dump, Madame said. She was busy wrapping a vase in newspaper when she glanced up and saw Lily, and she dropped it with a crash. Mon Dieu, ma chérie, where on earth have you been? Madame said. We've been worried sick. I've had to sell these things, I'm afraid. If only you'd given me your father's perpetual motion machine, we would never have had this trouble. Lily folded her arms across her chest. I see that, she said. Now, before you leave here forever, I think you'd better just put everything back in its rightful place. Zut alors! Don't be so ridiculous, Lily. I am your guardian now, the last remnant of your family. And if I decide to sell these things, there's nothing you can do. Why, even if your father was here... You are not my family, Lily interrupted, and you never will be. This is my family. She pushed aside the crates in the porch and opened the double doors to reveal Papa, Robert, Malkin, Anna, and her beloved Mrs. Rust standing together on the steps in front of the house. Behind them in the driveway stood the rest of the mechanicals, Mr. Wingnut, Miss Tock, and Captain Springer, all wound up and spoiling for a fight. They'd been home a few weeks, and Lily sat eating her breakfast of honey and tea cakes in the kitchen with Robert, Malkin, Papa, and Mrs. Rust. She loved this room. It was her favourite place to be. Malkin lay curled under her feet like some furry footstool. Papa was halfway through finishing his coffee and reading yesterday's paper, and Mrs. Rust bustled about him, whisking and frying and cooking with her various silver-shining hands. Robert had his feet on the fender, warming his toes like Lily had shown him, as he busily buttered a piece of toast with his penknife. She felt glad he was here. With everything they'd been through, it was good they could all be together as a family. She snatched a tea cake from the bright serving plate in the centre of the table, slathered it in butter and honey, and folding it in the palm of her hand, took the most enormous bite. Cogwheels and coat hangers, Mrs. Rust clucked. At least use a plate. Robert isn't, Lily complained through her mouthful. I am. I just haven't chosen one yet. He pulled an empty saucer from the table and plonked his toast onto it. There. Funny how everyone still complained about Lily's manners when Robert could eat anything any way he liked. But then he was a boy, and boys were always treated differently, had more freedom, got to do the good stuff, unlike Lily. Until recently, that is. Since they'd returned and taught more, Papa had decided not to send her back to Miss Scrimshaw's horrible academy, and instead had been teaching her about mechanicals and engines, along with Robert. Lily much preferred it to the endless book balancing, embroidery, and hair-don'ts she had to endure at the academy. If she could just get Papa to put Jack Dawes' book on lock-picking on the syllabus, she felt sure her new education would soon be complete. Listen to this, Papa said from behind the Daily Cog. The consortium of London clockmakers who were hired to repair Big Ben have finally finished fixing the tower's clockwork. What good news! Lily garbled through a mouthful of tea cake. She checked the byline. It was Anna's story. Perhaps that was why the aeronaut had barely visited them in the past 4 weeks. Or was there some other reason? But Lily didn't have time to think about this for too long, because Robert had finished his toast. "Come on, Lil," he said, standing up and brushing the crumbs from his trousers. "It's almost 10:30. Why don't we take a walk before lessons?" "A capital idea," Papa said. "You might be able to find a good Christmas tree we can chop down for next week. And make sure you wrap up warmly," he added. "It's colder than an icebox out there, and the forecast says it might snow again later." "What springs and water buckets?" Mrs. Rust muttered. "Don't you go bringing any more snow into my house. I don't want to be washing the floors again at this tocking hour of the day. I already did it once this morning." Lily nodded and plucked her coat from the back of her chair. As she and Robert struggled into their boots, she watched Mrs. Rust take down a long-handled frying pan from her selection of replaceable hands hung on the dresser, and Papa turned the page of his paper, peering at it through his glasses. Since he'd been back, everything had returned to normal. Almost, for Lily knew the truth of who she was now. She buttoned her coat and threw open the back door. More flakes had fallen during the night, and the air was sharp and cold. With Robert and Malcolm at her heels, Lily dashed out into the white garden, making new tracks in the pristine snow. Her pulse quickened as she ran, and she put a hand up to her chest and felt for the Cogheart hidden beneath her many layers of clothes. Boom, tick, boom, tick, boom, there it was. These last few weeks, its sound had changed, become stronger and deeper, more resonant, until she could almost believe it might go on forever. She still wasn't entirely sure if possessing such a heart was a gift or a burden, but she knew one thing was clear. Its beat was the music of living, the rhythm of life, and to her, it sounded beautiful. And for those of you who have absolutely loved following along with Cogheart, I'm pleased to say that there are 3 sequels already out, and the next book is called Moonlocket, and I, for one, am just about to order it so that I can get started with it straight away. This has probably been one of my most favourite books that I've read over the last few years to any class. I think it's absolutely fantastic. The description is wonderful, and I know some of you have found it quite difficult to follow along all of the description, and some of those words certainly would have up-leveled your vocabulary. But this is an incredible book with such lovely, vivid characters. I really hope you've enjoyed following along. That's it from me, and that's the end of Cogheart.